So much learning going on in this place. And I've been told that as soon as the devotees came in, because we've been doing this now for how long? How many years? 3 years? 3 years. And so that means it's palpable. So we welcome you out there in Cypher Space, wherever you are. Thank you for coming and joining us to hear the Srimad-Bhagavatam every day, which is a very special thing to do, the most special thing to do. So before we go on with our reading of the third canto of the Srimad-Bhagavatam, the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev, the third canto, we're going to read Srila Sanatana Goswami's beautiful and deep philosophical prayer, which gives us more insight into what we're hearing. It's called the Srimad-Bhagavata Mahima Stotram. It's from the Sri Krishna Lila Stava by Sanatana Goswami, and it goes like this. Sarva Shastrabdi Piyusha Sarva Vedaika Satpala Sarva Siddhanta Ratnaja Sarva Lokaika Drikprada. O nectar from the ocean of all scriptures, singular fruit of all the Vedas, rich mine of the precious gems of all conclusive truths, you are the only giver of sight to all the worlds. Sarva Bhagavata Prana Srimad Bhagavata Prabho Kali Dvanduditaditya Sri Krishna Parivartita. O life air of all the Supreme Lord's devotees, O Master Srimad Bhagavatam, you are the sun risen in the darkness of Kali. You are the exact image of Sri Krishna. Paramananda Pataya Prema Varshakshadaya Te Sarvadasa Vasevyaya Sri Krishnaya Namostume. I bow down to you who are supremely blissful to read. Your every syllable pours down a flood of prema. You can always be served by everyone. You are Sri Krishna himself. Madeka Bando Matsangin Madguro Man Mahadana Mannishtadaka Madbhagya Madananda Namostute. My only friend, my constant companion, my spiritual master, my great wealth, my savior, my good fortune, my source of ecstasy, I bow down to you. Asadu, sadutadayin, atini chochata kada, hanamun chagadachin mam, premna rit kantayospura. O bestower of saintliness to the unsaintly, O exalter of the most fallen, please never leave me. Always appear in my heart and my voice with pure love. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we've got the makings of a yatra here. We've got 7 devotees, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 devotees, 9 including myself, as soon as I become a devotee. And we're right in the, not in the middle, we're towards the beginning of Kapila Dev's teachings to his mother, Devahuti. And he's launched now into an explanation or a description of the fundamental principles of material nature. And by learning this, you can find out what's going on here. Without knowing this, no one has the foggiest idea what's going on here, why we're here, how this material nature is working, and what we're meant to do about it. Okay, chapter 26, Fundamental Principles of Material Nature, beginning with text 16. The influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is felt in the time factor, which causes fear of death due to the false ego of the deluded soul who has contacted material nature. Purport. The living entity's fear of death is due to his false ego of identifying with the body. Everyone is afraid of death. Actually, there is no death for the spirit soul. But due to our absorption in the identification of body as self, the fear of death develops. It is also stated in the Srimad-Bhagavatam 11.2.37, Bhayam dvitiya vivineshara syat. Dvitiya refers to matter, which is beyond spirit. Matter is the secondary manifestation of spirit. For matter is produced from spirit. Just as the material elements described are caused by the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Spirit, the body is also a product of the spirit soul. Therefore, the material body is called Dvitiya, or the second. One who is absorbed in the second element or second exhibition of the spirit is afraid of death. When one is fully convinced that he is not his body, there is no question of feeling fear, of fearing death, since the spirit soul does not die. If the spirit soul engages in the spiritual activities of devotional service, he is completely freed from the platform of birth and death. His next position is complete spiritual freedom from a material body. The fear of death is the action of Kala, or the time factor, which represents the influence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In other words, time is destructive. Whatever is created is subject to destruction and dissolution, which is the action of time. Time is a representation of the Lord, and it reminds us also that we must surrender unto the Lord. The Lord speaks to every conditioned soul as time. He says in Bhagavad Gita that if someone surrenders unto Him, then there is no longer any problem of birth and death. We should therefore accept the time factor as the Supreme Personality of Godhead standing before us. This is further explained in the following verse. Text 17. My dear mother, O daughter of Swayambhuva Manu, as the time factor, as I have explained, is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from whom the creation begins as a result of the agitation of the neutral, unmanifested nature. Purport. The unmanifested state of material nature, pradhan, is being explained. The Lord says that when the unmanifested material nature is agitated by the glance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it begins to manifest itself in different ways. Before this agitation, it remains in the neutral state, without interaction by the three modes of material nature. In other words, material nature cannot produce any variety of manifestations without the contact of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is very nicely explained in Bhagavad Gita. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of the products of material nature. Without his contact, material nature cannot produce anything. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, also a very suitable example is given in this connection. Although the nipples on a goat's neck appear to be breast nipples, they do not give milk. Similarly, material nature appears to the material scientist to act and react in a wonderful manner, but in reality it cannot act without the agitator, time, who is the representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When time agitates the neutral state of material nature begins to produce varieties of manifestations. Ultimately, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the cause of creation. As a woman cannot produce children unless impregnated by a man, material nature cannot produce or manifest anything unless it is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of a time factor. Text 18. By exhibiting his potencies, the Supreme Personality of Godhead adjusts all these different elements, keeping himself within as the super soul and without as time. Purport. Here it is stated that within the heart, the Supreme Personality of Godhead resides as the super soul. This situation is also explained in Bhagavad Gita. The super soul rests beside the individual soul and acts as a witness. This is also confirmed elsewhere in the Vedic literature. Two birds are sitting on the same tree of the body. One is witnessing and the other is eating the fruits of the tree. This Purusha, or Paramatma, who resides within the body of the individual soul, is described in Bhagavad Gita 13.23 as the Upadrashta, witness, and the Anumanta, sanctioning authority. The conditioned soul engages in the happiness and distress of the particular body given him by the arrangement of the external energy of the Supreme Lord. But the Supreme Living Being, or the Paramatma, is different from the conditioned soul. He is described in Bhagavad Gita as Maheshwara, or the Supreme Lord. He is Paramatma, not Jivatma. Paramatma means the super soul who is sitting by the side of the conditioned soul just to sanction his activities. The conditioned soul comes to this material world in order to lord it over material nature. Since one cannot do anything without the sanction of the Supreme Lord, he lives with the Jiva soul as witness and sanction giver. He is also Bhokta. He gives maintenance and sustenance to the conditioned soul. Since the living entity is constitutionally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Lord is very affectionate to the living entities. Unfortunately, when the living entity is bewildered or illusioned by the external energy, he becomes forgetful of his eternal relationship with the Lord. But as soon as he becomes aware of his constitutional position, he is liberated. The minute independence of the conditioned soul is exhibited by his marginal position. If he likes, he can forget the Supreme Personality of Godhead and come into the material existence with a false ego to lord it over material nature. But if he likes, he can turn his face to the service of the Lord. The individual living entity is given that independence. His conditional life is ended, and his life becomes successful as soon as he turns his face to the Lord. but by misusing his independence, he enters into material existence. Yet the Lord is so kind that as Supersoul, he always remains with the conditioned soul. The concern of the Lord is neither to enjoy nor to suffer from the material body. He remains with the jiva simply as sanction giver and witness, so that the living entity can receive the results of his activities, good and bad. Outside the body of the conditioned soul, the Supreme Personality of Godhead remains as the time factor. According to the Sankhya system of philosophy, there are 25 elements. The 24 elements already described, plus the time factor, make 25. According to some learned philosophers, the Supersoul is included to make a total of 26 elements. Text 19. After the Supreme Personality of Godhead impregnates material nature with his internal potency, material nature delivers the sum total of the cosmic intelligence, which is known as Hiranmaya. This takes place in material nature when she is agitated by the destinations of the conditioned souls. Purport. The impregnation of material nature is described in Bhagavad Gita, 14th chapter, verse 3. Material nature's primal factor is the Mahatattva, or breeding source of all varieties. This part of material nature, which is called Pradhan, as well as Brahman, is impregnated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and delivers varieties of living entities. Material nature in this connection is called Brahman because it is a perverted reflection of the spiritual nature. It is described in the Vishnu Purana that the living entities belong to the spiritual nature. The potency of the Supreme Lord is spiritual, and the living entities, although they are called marginal potency, are also spiritual. If the living entities were not spiritual, this description of impregnation by the Supreme Lord would not be applicable. The Supreme Lord does not put his semen into that which is not spiritual. But it is stated here that the Supreme Person puts his semen into material nature. This means that the living entities are spiritual by nature. After impregnation, material nature delivers all kinds of living entities, beginning from the greatest living creature, Lord Brahma, down to the insignificant ant, in all varieties of form. In Bhagavad Gita 14.4, material nature is clearly mentioned as Sarva Yonishu. This means that of all varieties of species, demigods, human beings, animals, birds, and beasts, whatever is manifested, material nature is the mother, and the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the seed-giving father. Generally, it is experienced that the father gives life to the child, but the mother gives its body, although the seed of life is given by the father. The body develops within the womb of the mother. Similarly, the spiritual living entities are impregnated into the womb of material nature, but the body, being supplied by material nature, takes on many different species and forms of life. The theory that the symptoms of life are manifest by the interaction of the 24 material elements is not supported here. The living entity, the living force, comes directly from the Supreme Personality of Godhead and is completely spiritual. Therefore, no material scientific advancement can produce life. The living force comes from the spiritual world and has nothing to do with the interaction of the material elements. Text 20. Thus, after manifesting variegatedness, the effulgent Mahatattva, which contains all the universes within itself, which is the root of all cosmic manifestations, and which is not destroyed at the time of annihilation, swallows the darkness that covered the effulgence at the time of dissolution. Purport. Since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is ever existing, all blissful and full of knowledge, His different energies are also ever existing in the dormant stage. Thus, when the Mahatattva was created, it manifested the material ego and swallowed up the darkness which covered the cosmic manifestation at the time of dissolution. This idea can be further explained. A person at night remains inactive, covered by the darkness of night. But when he is awakened in the morning, the covering of night, or the forgetfulness of the sleeping state, disappears. Similarly, when the Mahatattva appears after the night of dissolution, the effulgence is manifested to exhibit the variegatedness of this material world. Text 21. The mode of goodness, which is the clear, sober status of understanding the personality of Godhead, and which is generally called Vasudeva, or consciousness, becomes manifest in the Mahatattva. Purport. The Vasudeva manifestation, or the status of understanding the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is called pure goodness, or Shuddha Sattva. In the Shuddha Sattva status, there is no infringement of the other qualities, namely passion and ignorance. In the Vedic literature, there is mention of the Lord's expansion as the four personalities of Godhead: Vasudeva, Sankarsana, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Here, in the reappearance of the Mahatattva, the four expansions of Godhead occur. He who is seated within as Supersoul expands first as Vasudeva. The Vasudeva stage is free from infringement by material desires, and is the status in which one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the objective, which is described in the Bhagavad Gita as Adbhuta. This is another feature of the Mahatattva. The Vasudeva expansion is also called Krishna consciousness, for it is free from all tinges of material passion and ignorance. This clear state of understanding helps one to know the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Vasudeva status is also explained in Bhagavad Gita as Kshetrajna, which refers to the knower of the field of activities as well as the super knower. The living being who is occupied a particular type of body knows that body, but the super knower, Vasudeva, knows not only a particular type of body, but also the field of activities in all the different varieties of bodies. In order to be situated in clear consciousness or Krishna consciousness, one must worship Vasudeva. Vasudeva is Krishna alone. When Krishna or Vishnu is alone, without the accompaniment of his internal energy, he is Vasudeva. When he is accompanied by his internal potency, he is called Dwarkadish. To have clear consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, one has to worship Vasudeva. It is also explained in Bhagavad Gita that after many, many births, one surrenders unto Vasudeva. Such a great soul is very rare. In order to get release from the false ego, one has to worship Sankarsana. Sankarsana is also worshipped through Lord Shiva. The snakes, which cover the body of Lord Shiva, are representations of Sankarsana. And Lord Shiva is always absorbed in meditation upon Sankarsana. One who is actually a worshipper of Lord Shiva as a devotee of Sankarsana can be released from false material ego. If one wants to get freed from mental disturbances, one has to worship Aniruddha. For this purpose, worship of the moon planet is also recommended in the Vedic literatures. Similarly, to be fixed in one's intelligence, one has to worship Pradyumna, who is reached through the worship of Brahma. These matters are explained in Vedic literature. Explained in what?
Vedic literature.
Oh, just checking. Just checking. Text 22. After the manifestation of the Mahatattva, these features appear simultaneously. As water in its natural state before coming in contact with earth is clear, sweet, and unruffled, so the characteristic traits of pure consciousness are complete serenity, clarity, and freedom from distraction. Wouldn't that be nice? Purport. The purest status of consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, exists in the beginning. Just after creation, consciousness is not polluted. The more one becomes materially contaminated, however, the more consciousness becomes obscured. In pure consciousness, one can perceive a slight reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. As in clear, unagitated water, free from impurities, one can see everything clearly. So in pure consciousness, or Krishna consciousness, one can see things as they are. One can see the reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one can see his own existence as well. This state of consciousness is very pleasing, transparent, and sober. In the beginning, consciousness is pure. Text 23 and 24. The material ego springs up from the Mahatattva, which evolved from the Lord's own energy. The material ego is endowed predominantly with active power of three kinds: good, passionate, and ignorant. It is from these three types of material ego that the mind, the senses of perception, the organs of action, and the gross elements evolve. Purport. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification of the body as self. The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally, pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there is a chance of forgetting Krishna. This is exhibited in actual life. There are many instances in which someone acting in Krishna consciousness suddenly changes. In the Upanishads it is stated, therefore, that the path of spiritual realization is just like the sharp edge of a razor. The example is very appropriate. One shaves his cheeks with a sharp razor very nicely, but as soon as his attention is diverted from the activity, he immediately cuts his cheek because he mishandles the razor. Not only must one come to the stage of pure consciousness, but one must also be very careful. Any inattentiveness or carelessness may cause fall down. This fall down is due to false ego. From the status of pure consciousness, the false ego is born because of misuse of independence. We cannot argue about why false ego arises from pure consciousness. Factually, there is always the chance that this will happen, and therefore one has to be very careful. False ego is the basic principle for all material activities which are executed in the modes of material nature. As soon as one deviates from pure Krishna consciousness, he increases his entanglement in material reaction. The entanglement of materialism is the material mind, and from this material mind, the senses and material organs become manifest. Text 25. The threefold ahankara, the source of the gross elements, the senses and the mind, is identical with them because it is their cause. It is known by the name of Sankarsana, who is directly Lord Ananta with 1,000 heads. Text 26. This false ego is characterized as the doer, as an instrument, and as an effect. It is further characterized as serene, active, or dull, according to how it is influenced by the modes of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Purport. Ahankara, or false ego, is transformed into the demigods, the controlling directors of material affairs. As an instrument, the false ego is represented as different senses and sense organs, and as a result of the combination of the demigods and the senses, material objects are produced. In the material world, we are producing so many things, and this is called advancement of civilization. But factually, the advancement of civilization is a manifestation of the false ego. By false ego, all material things are produced as objects of enjoyment. One has to cease increasing artificial necessities in the form of material objects. One great Acharya, Narottam Das Thakur, has lamented that when one deviates from pure consciousness of Vasudeva or Krishna consciousness, he becomes entangled in material activities. The exact words he uses are Satsanga Chadi Kainu Asate Vilas Te Karani Lagila Ye Karma Banda Pangs. I have given up the pure status of consciousness because I wanted to enjoy in the temporary material manifestation. Therefore, I have been entangled in the network of actions and reactions. Text 27. From the false ego of goodness, another transformation takes place. From this evolves the mind, whose thoughts and reflections give rise to desire. Purport. The symptoms of the mind are determination and rejection, which are due to different kinds of desires. We desire that which is favorable to our sense gratification, and we reject that which is not favorable to sense gratification. The material mind is not fixed, but the very same mind can be fixed when engaged in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, As long as the mind is on the material platform, it is hovering. And all this rejection and acceptance is asat, temporary. It is stated that he whose mind is not fixed in Krishna consciousness must hover between acceptance and rejection. However advanced a man is in academic qualifications, as long as he is not fixed in Krishna consciousness, he will simply accept and reject and will never be able to fix his mind on a particular subject matter. Text 28. The mind of a living entity is known by the name of Lord Aniruddha, the supreme ruler of the senses. He possesses a bluish-black form resembling a lotus flower growing in the autumn. He is found slowly by the yogis. Purport. The system of yoga entails controlling the mind, and the Lord of the mind is Aniruddha. It is stated that Aniruddha is four-handed, with Sudarshan chakra, conch shell, club, and lotus flower. There are 24 forms of Vishnu, each differently named. Among these 24 forms, Sankarsana, Aniruddha, Pradyumna, and Vasudeva are depicted very nicely in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it is stated that Aniruddha is worshipped by the yogis. Meditation upon voidness is a modern invention of the fertile brain of some speculator. Actually, the process of yoga meditation, as prescribed in this verse, should be fixed upon the form of Aniruddha. By meditating on Aniruddha, one can become free from the agitation of acceptance and rejection. When one's mind is fixed upon Aniruddha, one gradually becomes God-realized. He approaches the pure status of Krishna consciousness, which is the ultimate goal of yoga. Text 29. By transformation of the false ego in passion, intelligence takes birth, O virtuous lady. The functions of intelligence are to help in ascertaining the nature of objects when they come into view and to help the senses. Purport. Intelligence is the discriminating power to understand an object, and it helps the senses make choices. Therefore, intelligence is supposed to be the master of the senses. The perfection of intelligence is attained when one becomes fixed in the activities of Krishna consciousness. By the proper use of intelligence, one's consciousness is expanded. An ultimate expansion of consciousness is Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is what? The ultimate expansion of consciousness. Text 30. Doubt, misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, and sleep, as determined by their different functions, are said to be the distinct characteristics of intelligence. I once had when I was in Italy, we made this Chinese young man was traveling around, and he just happened to come into Villa Vrindavan where we were staying, and he heard one lecture that knowledge is assimilated when we are sleeping. So the next day we looked for him and we couldn't find him anywhere. And finally someone found him, and he was laying down somewhere and he slept the whole day. And we asked him, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I heard yesterday that by sleeping you assimilate knowledge. So I thought I would just assimilate everything I'd heard, so I just slept all day. Anyway, you need enough. Otherwise, if you don't have enough, the intelligence won't work properly. All of us have experience of that. What's enough, what's too much and too little is different for each person. Anyway, this is a very, very interesting verse. I use this verse a lot when trying to explain Krishna consciousness to students and educated people. I'll read it again. Doubt, misapprehension, correct apprehension, memory, and sleep, as determined by their different functions, are said to be the distinct characteristics of intelligence. Purport: doubt is one of the important functions of intelligence. Blind acceptance of something does not give evidence of intelligence. Therefore, the word samshaya is very important. In order to cultivate intelligence, one should be doubtful in the beginning. But doubting is not very favorable when information is received from the proper source. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord says that doubting the words of the authority is the cause of destruction. In the Bible, this is called doubting Thomas. As described in the Patanjali Yoga system, pramana viparyaya vikalpa nidra smritaya. By intelligence only can one understand things as they are. By intelligence only can one understand whether or not he is the body. The study to determine whether one's identity is spiritual or material begins in doubt. When one is able to analyze his actual position, the false identification with the body is detected. This is viparyasa. When false identification is detected, then real identification can be understood. Real understanding is described here as nishchaya, or proved experimental knowledge. This experimental knowledge can be achieved when one has understood the false knowledge. By experimental or proved knowledge, one can understand that he is not the body, but spirit soul. Smriti means memory and svapa means sleep. Sleep is also necessary to keep the intelligence in working order. If there is no sleep, the brain cannot work nicely. In Bhagavad Gita, it is especially mentioned that persons who regulate eating, sleeping, and other necessities of the body in the proper proportion become very successful in the yoga process. These are some of the aspects of the analytical study of intelligence as described in both the Patanjali Yoga system and the Sankhya philosophy system of Kapila Dev in Srimad-Bhagavatam. Text 31. Egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses. The senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses of action. The senses of action depend on the vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. Purport. It has been explained in the previous verses that mind is the product of ego and goodness, and that the function of the mind is acceptance and rejection according to desire. But here, intelligence is said to be the product of ego and passion. That is the distinction between mind and intelligence. Mind is a product of egoism and goodness, and intelligence is a product of egoism and passion. The desire to accept something and reject something is very important. It's a very important factor of the mind. Since mind is the product of the mode of goodness, if it is fixed upon the Lord of the mind, Aniruddha, then the mind can be changed to Krishna consciousness. It is stated by Narottam Das Thakur that we always have desires. Desire cannot be stopped. Desire cannot be what?
Stop.
Checking. But if we transfer our desires to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is the perfection of life. As soon as the desire is transferred to lording it over material nature, it becomes contaminated by matter. Desire has to be purified. In the beginning, this purification process has to be carried out by the order of the spiritual master, since the spiritual master knows how the disciple's desires can be transformed into Krishna consciousness. As far as intelligence is concerned, it is clearly stated here that it is a product of egoism in passion. I'll repeat that. As far as intelligence is concerned, it is clearly stated here that it is a product of egoism in passion. By practice, one comes to the point of the mode of goodness, and by surrendering or fixing the mind upon the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one becomes a very great personality, or Mahatma. In Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said, Samahatma Sadurlabhaha. Such a great soul is very rare. In this verse, it is clear that both kinds of senses, the senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses for action, are produced of egoism in the mode of passion. And because the sense organs for activity and for acquiring knowledge require energy, the vital energy or life energy is also produced by egoism in the mode of passion. We can actually see, therefore, that those who are very passionate can improve in material acquisition very quickly. It is recommended in the Vedic scriptures that if one wants to encourage a person in acquiring material possessions, one should also encourage him in sex life. We naturally find that those who are addicted to sex life are also materially advanced, because sex life or passionate life is the impetus for the material advancement of civilization. For those who want to make spiritual advancement, there is almost no existence of the mode of passion. Only the mode of goodness is prominent. We find that those who engage in Krishna consciousness are materially poor, but one who has eyes can see who is the greater. Although he appears to be materially poor, a person in Krishna consciousness is not actually a poor man. But the person who has no taste for Krishna consciousness, we got to make a note. The word for is tor in this database. The person who has no taste, tor, should be for. Okay? Make a note. What is it in the book?
It's tor.
Here it's tor, and in the book it's for. Okay. Mm-hmm. Although it appears to be materially poor, a person in Krishna consciousness is not actually a poor man, but the person who has no taste for Krishna consciousness and appears to be very happy with material possessions is actually poor. Persons infatuated by material consciousness are very intelligent in discovering things from material comforts, but they have no access to understanding the spirit soul and spiritual life. Therefore, if anyone wants to advance in spiritual life, he has to come back to the platform of purified desire, the purified desire for devotional service. As stated in the Narada Pancharatra, engagement in the service of the Lord, engagement in the service of the Lord, when the senses are purified in Krishna consciousness, is called pure devotion. Let us read that. This is a very nice definition of pure devotion. As stated in Narada Pancharatra, engagement in the service of the Lord, when the senses are purified in Krishna consciousness, is called pure devotion. Text 32. When egoism and ignorance is agitated by the sex energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the subtle element sound is manifested. And from sound comes the ethereal sky and the sense of hearing. So we're going to stop here. This is very heady stuff. This is very deep, philosophical, heady stuff. So let's have some reflections and some discussions. And any points that have come out, that stuck out in your mind that you want to discuss, or reflections that you want to enlighten us further about, please feel free. Shamagori wants to say something. We've been waiting this for weeks.
I have a little confusion in my head. Well, probably a lot of confusion, but that it says that the false ego was first. So there's pure consciousness, and then the first thing that manifests is the false ego, which is identification with the material body. But at that point there is nothing else, just the soul and pure consciousness.
This is it's a process. Mm-hmm. It's like when it's like when we move from one room to another. It's not that, our body changes from that one body to another when we move into that room. There's a process of going into one room to another. So there's a process of transformation of energies. Mm-hmm. So the false ego is the most subtle form of material energy. Mm-hmm. Before that, it's the Mahatattva, and then it's Pradhan. So let's discuss this in a little more practical terms, because this is all very deep philosophical explanation of what's going on. But what happens is, this creation is the Sarga creation. This is the creation of Mahavishnu himself. It's all coming out of of Mahavishnu's body, all these things. And they're transforming one after another after they get to a certain stage of manifestation. Mm-hmm. But still it's not externally manifested. Mm-hmm. All the things that you hear in this part are being manifested within the mind of Mahavishnu. Mm-hmm. It's coming out of Mahavishnu, but it's the subtle stage. Mm-hmm. Now, we haven't even come to the stage of, the beginning of the creation, the Lord going into each universe, Garbhodakshai Vishnu, the form of Brahma, and then externally the manifestation starts, what we think and what we see as these different things. So now we're just talking conceptually. Mm-hmm. The Lord is planning out the creation. It's like a blueprint, It's like you're reading the blueprint and you're saying, yeah, but where is it? That's because it hasn't manifested yet. It's the plan within the mind of the Lord. Therefore, sometimes the material creation is described to be the dream of Lord Vishnu. It's like when we dream at night, all of a sudden there's so many forms and we're flying around and we're doing this and we're doing that, but our body's laying in the bed. So Mahavishnu is laying down on the causal ocean, and he's in kind of like a dreamlike state. Of course, never sleeps, but it looks like he's dreaming, and in that yoga nidra state, then all these things are going on. So the first thing that happens is the material energy which was drawn back into the body of Vishnu through his navel. This is not Garbhodakashayi Vishnu. This is Mahavishnu. Everything is drawn back into the body of Mahavishnu through his navel, including living entities, including time, including all the material elements in its unmanifested state. And then, and here it's described in one of the verses in the purports, the unmanifested desires, or another way of saying it is the unfulfilled desires of the living entities inside the body of Mahavishnu agitates Mahavishnu. And then he desires, actually it's they desire, but he fulfills the desire of the living entities within his own body, the unfulfilled desires that they had in the last creation, agitates him, and then he wants to enjoy with him. But Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur uses the example of the husband will wake up the wife sometime. He wants some pleasure, so he wakes up the wife. Can't have fun with the wife when she's sleeping. You know? So then that material energy comes out from the navel, and it kind of assumes the form of a cloud. It looks like a cloud in the vast spiritual sky. And then he glances, and that's what's talked about here as the impregnation of the souls into the material energy. He said the semen of the Supreme Lord isn't injected into anything material. So therefore, when that glance, before it touches Parvati or Durga or the material nature, Prakriti, then when that glance touches, then it transforms into Shiva. That is Sadashiva, is an aspect of Mahavishnu. And then the living entities are injected. And simultaneously, time is injected. So the living entities there, time is there. So the time is actually Krishna acting as the supersoul of the whole cosmic manifestation. And later on, when the breathing of Mahavishnu and the not the perspiration exactly, but from the pores of the body of Mahavishnu come little, like eggs, little what is it called? They call it huh?
Bubbles.
Empty shells.
No, not yet. They're like seeds, the seeds of the universe. There's a word that he uses particularly. Remember? Can't remember the word exactly. But each one of those, I guess you could call them sperms, but they're golden eggs. Yeah, the golden eggs, little tiny, and they're the what grows. Each universe grows from that form, and all of that energy, including the living entities and time, they all coagulate around each one of those seeds of the universe, and then it starts to expand and gradually grow. And as it's doing that, the transformations of these energies occur in that phase of creation. Mm-hmm. But still it's not externally manifested in each universe. Mm-hmm. It's described that the process is the same as that goes on in a woman's womb. Mm-hmm. There's, the energy that creates the form within the womb of the woman is there, and part of that energy expands into the form of the child, and there's the rest of it is there also. It's in the womb, but it's not part of the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's where the ingredients from the body come from. We have doctors in the house. Correct me if I'm wrong at how this works. Maybe it's called the placenta or something like that. So like that, the energies are all there and they all stay there. It's not all the energies that used up in the creation of the universe, of the universes. Therefore, when the Pradhan, which is that original unmanifested cloud that comes from the body of Mahavishnu, becomes, impregnated by the souls and time and the, seeds of the universes, then it changes into the Mahatattva.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore sometimes the Mahatattva is called the total material intelligence, because it begins to transform. And the first transformation is false ego. And then that false ego divides into goodness, passion, and ignorance. And those energies combine together in different ways to form all the senses of the living entities, the knowledge-acquiring senses, the active senses, the tanmatra, or the objects of sense gratification, sound, form, touch, taste, and smell.
Mm-hmm.
And these things are still not manifested. He's just creating the parts of the body that haven't been put together in an external form.
Mm-hmm.
They're just there, transforming. And then when that all kind of coagulates around each one of the universes, then he enters into each universe. And the energy that's within each one of those energies comes through the body of Garbhodaksha Vishnu, through his navel, in the form of a lotus stem, and then a flower comes. And that flower is the ingredients that will be used by Brahma to engineer the universe, the forms and the living entities and the life forms and the environments and everything, different species of life, different kinds of senses.
Just quick, there is.
Radhika Nagar has some.
It's just a clarification on this point that the empty shells are emanating from the pores of the Lord.
Empty shells?
The universes were like seed form, yeah.
Yes.
And we're talking about this development of, as you said, false ego in touch with passion, goodness and ignorance, giving birth to all these things.
Yes.
So this is already in these universes, and then Garbhodaksha Vishnu enters into it.
Yes.
And he fills half of the universe with his perspiration.
Yes.
Lies on the Garbhodaka ocean, yes. and then you're saying that it seems that all those ingredients manifest in the form of that
He's
lotus.
Like Hiranyagarbha. At that stage it's called Hiranyagarbha, the universal form.
Yeah. So all those ingredients manifest in the form of that lotus flower?
Yes. They come through his body.
Mm-hmm. So what is that shell made of in the first place?
Which shell?
That what comes out of those seed-like things that come out from the perspiration of Vishnu.
What are they made from?
Yeah, what are they made of? What is it?
It's the original material nature. It's the original material energy.
Mm.
It comes out from breathing, it comes out through the pores of the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual soul, the spiritual energy, is injected through the eyes.
So the living, it's technical anyway, but just for the sake of discussion, that the living entities are injected before Garbhodaksha Vishnu. It's Mahavishnu just looks at that cloud, like you said, and it's all there, like, you know, in a very subtle, subtle form. Pradhan. No, that's Mahatattva.
It's the womb of the total material energy.
Yeah.
And within the womb of the total material energy, the Mahatattva is created. Part of that total material energy becomes the Mahatattva. A part of that Mahatattva becomes like that. And each creation is manifested in more and more precise degrees, and the other energy is still there, and it forms the basis or the coverings of each universe. The stock of energy, of all those different energies, form the coverings of each universe.
So I have in connection with text 22, this is complicated to understand. It says the pure status of consciousness or Krishna consciousness exists in the beginning. Just after creation, consciousness is not polluted.
That's the glance of Mahavishnu. Just like when the rain comes down, it's distilled, it's pure. And then when it touches the ground, then it becomes polluted. So the glance of material energy is pure consciousness. The glance of Mahavishnu is pure consciousness. The material energy is eternal.
Yeah.
But it's material, but it's spiritual because it comes from the body of Vishnu, and nothing from material can come from the body of Vishnu, but by the will of Krishna, by the will of Mahavishnu, that energy acts as if it's inert.
So we understand that this is going on perpetually, this creation of the material universe, that's the beginning.
And the disillusion.
So these living entities are also...
And that whole thing is going on in one breath. Mahavishnu. When he breathes out, the whole thing is going on, and it goes on for 311 trillion, 80 billion years. And when he breathes in, it all comes back into his body.
But the accumulated karma of the living entities is also injected there with the glands, right? The living entities carry their own karma from previous...
Yes.
Yeah. So this is where I am kind of a little confused here, because when he's talking about the pure state of consciousness or Krishna consciousness exists in the beginning, just after creation.
In terms of time and space. That's why it's confusing.
Yeah.
You're thinking in the beginning, but in terms of time and space, there is no beginning.
Well, the confusion comes in terms of the living entity. If he's referring here to a pure state of consciousness, he's referring to souls, or he's referring to an energy, or what is it? The pure state of Krishna consciousness exists in the beginning. Is the consciousness of those souls?
Yes.
So it's
before the soul comes in contact with that material energy, it's in a pure state of consciousness.
So in other words, the living entity...
Contaminated consciousness is the souls that are already contaminated.
So it seems that the living entity becomes polluted by coming in touch with material nature.
Yes,
that's what he's been saying.
He already has his unfulfilled material desires.
Yeah.
Which
So
is,
that's
which is subtle material energy.
Can I ask Maharaj?
This is Pundaree speaking.
Text 31. Egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses, the senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses of action. The senses of action depend on the vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. And I'm sort of locking into this verse because I'm sort of driven by action. I'm always thinking, what's the next thing to do? And I'm not sure about the vital energy. Could you expand a little bit on the vital energy that drives my senses in that way?
The soul is resting in the vital air, the life air. When you say vital energy, life air, it's the same. And the soul rests in that life air. When that vital energy leaves the body, the soul leaves the body. So when the soul comes, it goes to his point a little bit. This is a further explanation of your point. When the soul goes back into the body of Vishnu, the mental energy also around each soul is also dissolved and goes back into the body of Vishnu. But the vital air is what carries the soul, this is very subtle. I don't know if it's possible for us to understand this in our present state of consciousness. That's the problem. When you start to discuss this, there's books and books and books and books in the Vedas to describe all these things, the logic and, So I think we have to simplify it so that we can understand it. The vital air is the life energy, and that life, it's not this consciousness, and therefore it's called contaminated consciousness when it comes in contact with that air, with that vital, that life air, which is very subtle.
How do I change that?
Association with Krishna. You can't change it. Krishna can change it, but you can't change it. That's the key to the whole thing. We can't change it. As long as we think we can change it, we will be in anxiety. And everything that we do, which is not even being done by us, it's being done by the material nature. But, everything that we think and desire and, attempt that we make, to change it causes more complications around us. And the combination of all living entities doing that same thing creates the complication of the material universe. And over time, it becomes more and more degraded by the influence of time. And that's why it's described in the beginning that time is the energy which moves things. It moves things forward. The time factor, which is Krishna, sanctions and makes possible the movements of the material energy. It attracts into the atoms from in one place or another to make the forms change. In the spiritual world, there's also movement and change of everything, but the forms don't change. But the movement that makes the forms move and do it is love. That's the pure form of consciousness. Original Krishna consciousness is love of Krishna. And when that love of Krishna becomes covered by all these different material energies, then it changes, and Krishna, in the form of time, facilitates the movements of the energies and the forms according to the desires of living entities to want to do things. And therefore, we're completely dependent on Krishna. Therefore, this year's marathon is theme of it is shelter, Krishna's shelter, something like that. Full shelter, something like that. Huh? The only shelter. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what this means. The only shelter. These books are the only shelter because of the only opportunity that we have to understand what's going on here. Srimad-Bhagavatam.
Just following up with this in text 23-24 purport. This is in the beginning. Purport to verse 23-24. In the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. This is called false ego, or identification. Contamination sprang up.
Yeah.
This is called false ego, or identification of the body as the self.
Did you say prana, or what did you say? You said something.
Sprang.
Oh, sprung up.
Sprang up.
Yeah, okay.
The living entity exists in the natural state of Krishna consciousness, but he has marginal independence, and this allows him to forget Krishna. Originally pure Krishna consciousness exists, but because of misuse of marginal independence, there is a chance of forgetting Krishna. I mean, it's just this misuse of...
Wait, let's go step one back. Step one back. This Jiva soul is an infinitesimal particle of Krishna's consciousness. But it's not that we put all the souls together and that makes Krishna. It's like the sun and the photons, molecular particles of light that come from the sun. So the souls are parts of Krishna. And therefore they have the qualities of Krishna only in an infinitesimal degree. And because of that, the material energy is greater than them, in a sense, even though it's spiritual and it's inferior energy, but quantitative-wise it's bigger, and therefore the tiny soul has a tendency to become overwhelmed by it and attracted by it. But Krishna never becomes attracted by it because he's the sum total of everything.
Because we have on one side the description of
Sorry.
On one hand, we are hearing the description of the creation of the false ego, but I'm just wondering, at one point, that the living entity it comes into
No, not contact. That's not phrased properly. The false ego is created first.
Yeah.
All of this is the same energy.
Yeah.
It's the same energy, and
Material energy.
it's transforming into different, aspects of the same energy.
Yeah.
So the first transformation of the pradhan is the Mahatattva. The first manifestation of the Mahatattva is the false ego. And that false ego then manifests into goodness, passion, and ignorance.
Giving birth to mind,
And then-
intelligence,
yes,
working senses. Yeah.
Yes, the goodness, mode of goodness transforms into mental energy, and the demigods, which are the primal demigods, the ones that are in
Goodness.
charge of the primal energies.
Yeah. So
and
at
then, and then false ego, the mode of intelligence, transforms into, passion transforms into intelligence.
But at this point, the living entity is not involved in misusing his intelligence. The Lord is just created.
This is all still in the sarga.
That's right.
This is in the sarga.
So the living entity,
living entities haven't acted.
Krishna
in the material
just
world yet.
created the playground.
Yeah. No, he's now. That's later. The playground.
He's the
performing parts.
elements.
He's creating parts of everything that will then be put together later on by Brahma in each universe. That's the playground.
So when Prabhupada is writing that from in the beginning, from clear consciousness, or the pure state of Krishna consciousness, the first contamination sprang up. What is it actually meaning?
It means when it contacts, then it changes. Sprung up means it changes. The soul contacts false ego, and then the identification is made that allows the soul to identify with the material energy. He doesn't have a body yet. But he's contaminated, and therefore he has the capacity to identify with the body, with the material energy, rather. But the parts of the bodies haven't been created yet, so how can you identify with the body at that stage? The parts of the body haven't been put together yet.
The question arises in my mind if
it's like when the soul, in the womb, the baby is there, the soul is there, but only in a state of consciousness does it become, or development, does it become conscious. So therefore, sprung up means, the first energy that allows the soul to identify with the material energy has sprung up, and there he is. And he doesn't got anything to do anything with it yet, but he's caught by the material energy. He's attracted to the material energy. That's that first contamination. That's contaminated consciousness. And there's no other way to understand this other than devotional service. And hearing and trying to understand it is devotional service. So you keep hearing and keep trying to understand. And when there's a doubt or confusion, you keep going on and hearing it again and again, and inquiring from spiritual authority. And eventually the pieces of the puzzle begin to come together. Anyway, when I look back on when I first started to read this in 1973, this canto first came out in 1973. And when I first read it, it just blew my mind completely. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I couldn't understand it either, but I could understand something. Something was there that was deeper than anything I'd ever heard before, and it made perfect sense, but I couldn't put it together. But just by hearing and trying to understand and explaining and trying to explain over and over again for, 46 years, gradually it's beginning to sink in. And I can plug in, when we have a conversation like this, my I don't know, spiritual intelligence, whatever you want to call it, is able to fill in some gaps and makes it more clear. The picture keeps getting a little bit more. But it's not that we're going to get it completely. We're infinitesimal, and this universe it's infinite compared to us. So we, as it's described in the end of the Bhagavatam, it's described that birds fly in the sky, at the speed and distances according to their capacities. So all we can do is try to explain it according to our capacity. And nobody can understand them. That's what inconceivable means. I heard Gopi Puranadana Prabhu answer this question or define, according to the Sanskrit, what inconceivable means. It doesn't mean that you can't understand anything about God. It means you can't understand everything about God, and no one can understand everything about God. Therefore it's inconceivable. But each soul can understand enough about God to be able to want to go back to Godhead and to be able to be eligible to go back to the spiritual world. And even then you won't understand everything, because even then you're under the influence of the Yogamaya. It's our natural constitutional position to be controlled. Controlled.
One thing one thing for sure, that there is no any other philosophy that has anything anywhere near to explain how creation takes place. Like the Bible is very, very simplistic, and scientists, they're trying, but they're not trying on the right way, so they are very limited. And here it is. It's very wonderful.
Exactly.
And the interesting thing that somebody told me a few days ago, that scientists are now discovering that the universe contains something what they call the anti-energy, or I'm not sure what it is, how they call it, but it's actually a liquid. They say it's some kind of liquid, not water that comes from the tap, but it has a liquid form. And when I told to the person that in the Vedas it says that every universe is half filled with liquid, then they were in ecstasy. It's like, wow, and they said it's there for thousands of years, that information.
Yeah, they say, I read an article that said that one of the real telescopes that look farther and deeper, they've actually seen bodies of liquid. Yes. Rati Manjari has a question, and Bhakta Matt is going to be the via medium between us and Haribol Rati, Hare Krishna. We're missing you.
Okay. Rati says, my question is related to the point in Srila Prabhupada's purport to verse 31, where he speaks that persons that are passionate can very quickly improve in material acquisitions. But that's kind of a follow-up to our first question here. She says, Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj, please accept my humble obeisances. I have a question. Nowadays, the lifestyle of minimalism is very trendy. From what I understand, owning very few items and being conscious about one's consumption. It sounds like it could be a spiritual thing, but some of the followers seem more like refined sense enjoyers. Could you please comment on how we should understand minimalism and how we can preach to its followers?
Minimalism is a material concept, which means the less I have, the more I will be able to detach myself from the material world. It's a material formula. But Krishna consciousness, although it helps the soul if it is not attached to material energy, but some of the most opulent kings of the world who had more material things than anybody can conceive of nowadays were the most elevated in consciousness. So it's not that there's a direct relationship between, the minimal lifestyle and, pure consciousness. But it can help to reduce the fever. If, let me see how to explain this. Srila Prabhupada describes that if material possessions are given to a devotee by Krishna, then they increase the Krishna consciousness movement and his devotional service or her devotional service. But if material facilities are given and it causes them to forget Krishna and go away from Krishna, then it's a gift of the material energy. And, so the materialistic conception is that if I have, the less I have, the more close I will be to God or be spiritual. But it's not necessarily true. It may be a help for most people, but Christian consciousness isn't dependent on having less or more. It's dependent on being less attached to what we have, whether it be less or more. One can be very attached to a minimal existence. And what happens when you become very attached to a minimal existence and you become proud of being a yogi or a renunciant? And then from that, you usually fall down and end up getting all kinds of things again. We can read the first verse of the 18th chapter of the Gita. Do we have a Gita? Oh. It's amazing too, even more amazing than the Bhagavatam. Well, that's maybe not the right way to put it, but everything's there in the Gita. All these things are in the Gita, but they're in a very minimal expression, conclusion. Yes. First two verses, the 18th chapter. Arjuna uvacha sanyasyasya mahabaho tatvam ichchami veditum tyagasya cha rishikesha pritak keshinishudana. Arjuna said, O mighty armed one, I wish to understand the purpose of renunciation, tyaga, and of the renounced order of life, sannyas, O killer of the Kesha demon, master of the senses. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha Kam Ya Nam Karmanam Nityam Sannyasam Kavayovidu Sarva Karma Palatyagam Prahus Tyagam Bichakshanaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the giving up of activities that are based on material desire is what learned men call the renounced order of life, sannyas. Should I read that again? Thank you. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, the giving up of activities that are based on material desire is what learned men call the renounced order of life, sannyas. And giving up the results of all activities is what the wise call renunciation, tyaga. So it doesn't depend on how much or less you have. It depends on giving up activity for the sense of sense gratification or material desire. And if you're Krishna conscious and you're desiring everything for Krishna, and as a result you're collecting a whole bunch of money and building a huge temple and engaging all kinds of people in different devotional services, then that's sannyas. And if you're doing all those things without any attachment to the results, then that's renunciation. So the giving up of activity based on material desire is sannyas, and the giving up of the fruits of activity is renunciation. Therefore, in the 6th chapter, first verse of the 6th chapter, where the Lord defines sannyas, he says, oh, went back too far, sorry. Get my glasses fixed. I just got my glasses fixed. Get a better set of eyes. Yeah. He says, Anashrita karma palam karyam karma karoti yaha sasanyasi cha yogi cha naniragnir nachakriya. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one who is unattached to the fruits of his work and who works as he is obligated, is in the renounced order of life. And he is the true mystic, not he who lights no fire and performs no duty. Seems like we've got a room full of renunciates here. And mystics. James, you look like you're about to say something.
Thank you, Maharaj.
This is Bhakta James, by the way.
Thank you, Maharaj. That was amazing. You knew before I was going to speak, but you're right. Just a very simple thing. I may be out of place, but I found tonight's lessons absolutely, the only word I could think of is blow my mind. And when you said in the early 70s you had that feeling as well, and the only comparison that I can draw from my past, I remember being a young boy about 3.5, 4, and I was in the bathroom and there was a white door in front of me, and all of a sudden it was like everything dissolved, and I had an awesome fear of overwhelming something or other, like reality. And I think it was being quite young and then maybe going back to a pre-birth state. And with some of tonight's lesson, I got that feeling back again. Almost like the awesomeness of reality. And then at that stage, there's a feeling to want to go to safety. And I've come to realise at this stage in my life that it's with Krishna, to get out of the material suffering.
Exactly.
Well put. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that nice realization. That's really wonderful. Yeah, and the fact is that when we just begin to grasp the enormity of it and the depth of it, then once we actually get it and we understand that there's no way that I'm going to, compete with this or in any way, figure it out myself, then I get a sense of awe, that can help me to approach with humility. And that's ultimately the core of shelter. It's like now it's raining outside. If it rains really hard and you're out there somewhere and just get caught in the rain that's just coming down in danger, you're in danger. What you do, you just run to the nearest tree or the nearest overhang. You don't think about it and try to analyze what's happening. You just immediately, when you realize you're in danger. So therefore Prabhupada said the beginning of spiritual life is to realize, that I'm in danger. I'm in danger, and I can't figure all this out myself.
Maharaj, thank you very much again for a very wonderful opportunity for reading and the discussions we've had so far. The explanations of so many different energies and transformation of energies and the processes involved in that transformation, we're trying to understand, but it's beyond my understanding. But is it possible? Obviously, this is a chapter where Lord Kapila is explaining to his mother Devahuti a particular aspect of creation. Is it possible that you explain explain to us how this is actually in the spiritual world, where this relates to us being able to develop our love for Krishna and his devotees? How does that happen? Because here we in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is explaining that it's the misuse of that tiny little independence we have. And is that independence actually our key to developing love of devotees and of the Lord?
The original consciousness is love of Krishna. That's our original consciousness. So this description is explaining how that original consciousness is transformed from love to lust. That's what's being described here. Material energy, when the material energy attracts the soul, and then soul identifies with the material energy, then the love is transformed to lust. That's the difference. Lust means the desire for my sense gratification, and love means the desire for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. Lust means the desire for the pleasure of my own senses, and love means the desire for the pleasure of Krishna's senses. So the Sankhya philosophy is meant to help us understand how that came about, at least to the extent where we can realize that, oh, this is a big mistake. And then to reverse that process. There is a process of reversing it. There's a mystic yoga process. It's described when Dhritarashtra became liberated. You know, there's other great kings that went to the forest, and there's descriptions of how they reversed that process of creation. And what came out is the pure soul. But unless that pure consciousness comes in contact with Krishna, then it remains in a state of neutrality or liberation without activity, without service. So the service is the beginning of the redevelopment, or not redevelopment, but the uncovering of the love. The love is there. Nitya Siddha Krishna Prema Sabhukabhanoi. Every living being at its core is Krishna conscious. Love of Krishna is there in the core of everyone. And when that, I don't know how to explain this. When that consciousness of love for Krishna identifies with the material energy and comes through the material senses, then it becomes distorted, and the love or affection, instead of going to Krishna, goes to the material forms, and one becomes attracted to things that are of the same mode of nature that we're predominantly in at the moment. That's why even we get a lover, and if the modes change, then we just part, because there's no more fun, because that person doesn't like what I like, and I don't like what that person likes, and therefore we part. There's the definition of love in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. One of the aspects of the definition of love in Chaitanya Charitamrita is when there is actually a reason, a good reason, for leaving the other person, and you don't leave. So there's a little tinge of reflection of that love in the material world, but it's not complete, it's not real. Because you have to leave the person. You're forced, whether you like it or not. How long have you two been married now?
37 years.
37 years. Well, huh?
In this lifetime.
Yeah, that's probably true. Probably true. Soulmates. But you have to leave in this body. You have to leave each other and forget each other. That's it. That's the bottom line. That's the, what are they saying? The ice water of truth. But Krishna's form doesn't change. Therefore, if you meditate on Krishna in loving service, then you become free, because he'll never leave you.
We're part and parcel of him, so we never leave.
No, you never leave.
And he never
But you can, there's a sense that we're leaving. That's the influence of the material nature. That's the purpose. It's Krishna. It's like the sun is making cloud from the ocean, and the cloud is covering the sun from the vision of the souls on the earth. cloud can never cover the sun. How big is the sun? How many tens of thousands of times bigger than the earth? No way that a cloud on the earth can cover the sun. It just gets in the way of us seeing the sun, that's all. But that's created by Krishna. So Krishna, this basic process of creation that's being described is meant to bring us to the realization that Krishna is doing all of this. He's created all of this for us, and all of the intricate, changes and exchanges and of the energy that makes us bewildered and think that we're material and gives us all these, varieties of happiness and distress and all these things. It's all Krishna just covering us because we wanted to be independent. We wanted to enjoy without him, and we can't. So he's so kind, he just gives it to us in a way that we won't be able to, so that we'll eventually come back to him. Simple as that. That's the bottom line. So the purpose of the expansion of understanding the expansion of the creation is to humble us.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
I don't want to steal anyone else's question.
Pundarik has something to say.
Years ago, we learnt Vrindaye Tulsi Devi Priyai E Keshavashachar Krishna Bhakti, and now we say Vishnu Bhakti.
Vishnu Bhakti. It's not Krishna Bhakti.
Uh-huh.
It's not in the verse.
In the first.
Sentiment of devotees who want to be with Krishna, in Golokam Dhamma and Gopis.
Sorry.
The verse is Vishnu Bhakti. It's not Krishna Bhakti, and Vishnu is the name of Krishna.
That's a good one.
Yeah, in the first books that we had, it said Krishna Bhakti.
That was a mistake.
It was a mistake.
Yes.
Yeah. Does that link to? Does that link to the purport of verse 21, where it says that to develop Krishna consciousness, we need to focus on Vasudev, and Vasudev is Krishna without his internal potency, and that seems like a mini contradiction to me, because how can Krishna be without his internal potency?
Vasudev is a term that means Krishna is all-pervasive. It also means the son of Vasudev. It's like when Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was liberated by Lord Chaitanya, and he quoted this verse, Tate nukampam susumikshama. The last part of it is, say that again? Vimukti maninas. No, I don't remember this. Just mukti. Yeah, mukti sadaita bhayat. So when he quoted that verse of Lord Chaitanya, he changed the word mukti to bhakti. Because to him, when he heard the word mukti, it conjured up in his mind impersonal liberation. He wanted to destroy it. And then Lord Chaitanya said, you can't do that. You can't change the verse. That's the verse of the Bhagavatam. You can't change the word from mukti to bhakti. And then he explained to him how mukti in that particular verse means bhakti. So the word in that verse, Vrindaye Tulsi Devi Priyaya Keshavashana, Vishnu Bhakti, that verse, that word Vishnu means Krishna. It's a name for Krishna. Just like there's a word Vishnu for a demigod. It's not Krishna, it's a name of a demigod. So you have to understand the word in context, the names in context.
In the same connection, because he's saying how we should worship Pradyumna as Sankara, one may wonder if this is actually required or not. Because the emphasis of Prabhupada makes elsewhere is never on worshipping these different forms of,
What are you talking about?
Prabhupada in the purport is saying that. I had a similar question. That Prabhupada in the purport is mentioning that in order to become free from false ego, one should worship Sankarshan, or, in order to become free from mental disturbances, one should worship Aniruddha.
But why?
That's a question.
I'll answer. Because Sankarshan is the controller of the false ego. So if you want to become free from the false ego, then you worship Sankarshan, and he can free you from false ego because he's the controller of false ego.
But is worshiping Lord Chaitanya not sufficient?
Yeah, of course it is, because Vasudeva and Sankarshan and Pradyumna and Aniruddha and Radharani, they're all within the body of Lord Chaitanya. So you can't say, that means there's a difference. There's no difference. Because all just like Krishna, within the body of Krishna are the forms of all the Vishnu forms and all the incarnations, and every form of Krishna and expansions are all contained within the body of Krishna. So therefore you only need to worship Krishna to satisfy all those personalities. But still, there are personalities who choose and who want and are devotees, eternal devotees of Sankarshan and Pradyumna and Aniruddha. And they worship them. And they're properly situated and they're happy. They're not thinking, I should become a gopi, so therefore I'll stop worshipping my Lord Ramachandra. That happened right in Lord Chaitanya's pastimes. And Anupama is the brother of Rupa and Sanatana, and Rupa and Sanatana were surrendering to Lord Chaitanya and chanting Hare Krishna in ecstasy. And the Anupama was younger than them, and he was very influential. They were very influential. Rupa and Sanatana Goswami were. So they were convincing him, they were preaching to him, yes, you have to chant Hare Krishna with us, and we'll go and we'll worship Lord Chaitanya and we'll be in ecstasy together. He says, all right. And then that night, he couldn't do it. He couldn't give up his full devotion to Lord Ramachandra. And then he came to him the next morning with tears in his eyes. He says, please forgive me, I can't do this because I've given my heart to Lord Ramachandra, that's it. So they said, oh, great. And then when Lord Chaitanya heard about that, when Lord Rupa Goswami went to Puri and met Lord Chaitanya, and then he told him that his brother had died, and Lord Chaitanya, and then he told him what he said. Lord Chaitanya glorified him as a great devotee, greatest devotee, he said, Okay, we're going to stop there. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. This is a real assembly of sages with all these wonderful realizations. Hare Krishna. It's unlimited. There's no end to it. It's an ocean, and you can just keep learning to swim in the ocean, and then you can go back to Godhead. Shri Kapila Dev ki jai. Devahuti's questions ki jai. Gaur Premanandi. Thank you very much, everybody. Welcome to Wisteria College. We'll see.